Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We have a great show today with two wonderful poets, Ramón Garcia and Kathleen Tyler. Ramón will read first and then Kathleen. Ramón Garcia is the author of two books of poetry, The Chronicles, Red Hand Press 2015, and Other Countries, What Books Press 2010, a monograph on the artist Ricardo Belventi, University of Minnesota Press 2013, and a chapbook, Strays, Foundlings Press 2021. His new book of poetry, Strange Signatures, will be published in January 2025 by Walton Well Press. His poetry has appeared in a variety of journals and anthologies, including the Best American Poetry Anthology, The Floating Borderlands, 25 Years of U.S. Hispanic Literature, the Los Angeles Review of Books, New Writing from the Americas, Gulf Coast, and Plume. He is Vice President of the Board of Trustees at Beyond Broke Literary Center in Venice, California. A founding member of What Books Press, he is Associate Editor of Plume Literary Journal. He teaches at California State University, Northridge, and lives in Eagle Rock. Ramon's poetry is personal, poignant. He's a great observer. There's music in his poetry. Here's a superb poet, Ramón Garcia.
Thank you, Harry, for that generous and beautiful introduction. And thank you, Jennifer, Allegra, Kathleen, and all the Creative Chaos team. It's nice to be back and to read a few poems with you. And I look forward to Kathleen's reading also, and very glad to be reading with her. I'm going to begin with the poem from my first book, Other Countries, entitled Inheritance. After the metropolises and small towns, the rural trains and undergrounds, I'm back in this flat scene. The suburbs as existential stage set. What was the role I left behind, but never managed to abandon, with death the one and only understudy? Even the plants and hedges propped about the overly related houses, and the sunflowers in the alleys have taken direction from the city planners. The actors become their roles, a family dialogue. I unspooled the script, entangled in the spirit and knotted in the flesh, that was transcribed by mute experience in the alien language of a true self. The lights are bothersome, and the audience is tired. 3 acts, a minor epic entitled Family Life. And I'm going to read 3 short poems from The Chronicles. It's my second book. This is from a character in one of my favorite Shakespeare's plays, The Tempest, the witch that's never mentioned. Well, she's mentioned kind of in passing, but she never appears as a character in the play. Sycorax. I mothered deformity, the imperfect language of perfected curses. Darkest abandonment, you populate islands and continents. O father of plunder, I give you Caliban. He is broken, various shards of a mirror made to reflect your slashed eyes, your misaligned monstrous mouths, inescapable offspring of crime. Lady with the Cats. I don't want to see the lady a few houses down, mistress of many cats, who drives a green Cadillac. No one knows anything about her, keeper of an effortlessly guarded privacy. In what conspiracy of contentment does she live? Her face is a soft meadow, rippling in the late hours of the suburbs. This is a poem about when I lived downtown Los Angeles, lived there for many years before I moved during the pandemic. It's called Bohemia. I live in a converted bank downtown in the third world of Los Angeles, a small studio, a fourth floor view of the backside of an abandoned building where sunlight gathers and diffuses on the century-old brick wall, on windows darkened with grime or covered up with boards. Junkies shoot up in the piss-stinking alley. The movie crews hose down for filming now and then to transform it into New York, a futuristic cyborg city, or backdrop to some music video. And I ask myself, what has brought me here, to the forgotten and faked, to what the cities have chewed up or hallucinate? I long for trees and children, for what my vagrant soul spurned. I long for suburbs, other unlivable landscapes. I'm going to read a few poems that are fairly new. They're going to be in my next book. This one's entitled, has a kind of odd title, Made Up Voices. Once in the Paris metro, a short lady asked me if I was American, Mexican, native, tourist and Parisian small talk. She asked if I knew who Miss Piggy was. Of course, and she whispered. She was embarrassed. I'm the voice of Miss Piggy in French. A voice actor she was, a rare thing in France. Curious, risking being crass, I asked, does it pay well? She smiled, admitted that it did. It's an art I have a talent for, and for the money, easy work, she said. She had been doing it for more than 30 years. It's weird to make a living off of voices that are not even human, she said. Oh, but you're a poet, she reasoned. Maybe that's not so weird for poets or for Americans. I smiled, nodding in agreement, thanked her for the conversation, and got off at Montparnasse. The title, you'll notice a little ironic. The title of this poem is They Shoot Horses, Don't They? For years, I lived in the Van Nuys building on Spring Street, a speck of neglected Beaux-Arts that has eluded redevelopment. It was not up to code, renters half in hiding, urban pilgrims in dark transitions. It reeked of notes from the underground. I thought I was building character, but even now I don't know if I was punishing myself or was paralyzed by fear and student debt and loneliness. There was dirt and dumptiness that tarnished La Dolce Vita imaginings, daily encounters with updated Day of the Locusts characters I thought interesting and colorful, Tinseltown picturesque. Nothing has changed inside the labyrinth of dusty corridors, but rents have tripled and keep rising. Something of me died there to be reborn only half a block away, in the recovered condominium splendors of air conditioning and heating, building maintenance, the absence of leaks in times of rain. This is about one of my favorite modern American poets and the way that he, the way he died. Hart Crane leaves Mexico. The ocean's razor brilliance shimmers in the horizon's definitive promise. One final violence will I bequeath to depths beyond the wave's surface chaos, the sundering distances of absolute lyrics. Foundling son of death's baptismal cadence, I am become salt in bottomless obscurity, seafloor serenity, where sailors' bones awaken Christ in my soul emptied skeleton, as sharks ritually circle to the calling of mute siren lullabies. I am the sacred rejected by Puritan shores. Agony in the cold sands of dissolution is my coming home. I wrote this poem the day that the French pop singer Françoise Hardy died, and I hadn't listened to her much before that, and actually only knew a few songs from her, but I kind of remembered her image, and somehow it inspired this poem entitled Françoise Hardy. Françoise Hardy has died. France is not what it was, and rock and roll, that cold-hearted father, has abandoned its children. She was my mother's age, and like my mother, she suffered, but differently. Her songs recall the schmaltzy songs of José José and Enrique Guzmán, but what came first? They sound of another time, when young witches and prematurely aged angels conspired with Orpheus's lyre in recording studios. In the heaven where Hardy has gone, kitsch and art are no longer at war. Sultriness joins forces with melancholy in the flawless kingdom of Parisian fashion houses. It is summer in LA, and if it weren't for the French language, her voice would echo in the breeze of the Pacific off the Santa Monica Pier. After all, her singing was got from the sirens who live too close to the land and don't need to sing, who spend their days watching surfer man boys practice the art of riding waves, waves that become notes to famous songs composed with the waters of longing. Who knows who she really was? A dying breed, a dying style, traces of Baudelaire and the new wave. Her voice is receding like the distinctiveness of cities that once were made for the art of flirting, the glamour of the young and broken-hearted. And I'll stop there.
Well, thank you, Ramon. Your poetry is always personal, but you transcend the personal. You know, you're empathetic, you're elegiac, you have such a large range of personal landscape literature, and also your there's a learnedness. I guess that goes with your knowledge of literature, a learnedness and a precision, and they're just such a confident style. Could you just tell us, you know, the poem that I mean, I love all the poems you wrote, but I always have loved Hart Crane. And could you talk a little bit about that Hart Crane poem, about how it began and how you wrote it?
Wow, that's a really good question, because it was a little different. I didn't set out to write it. I wasn't even reading Hart Crane, I think. And I was just thinking about, actually, I was reading a biography on him. You know, he died, he jumped off a boat on the way back from Mexico in 1933. And it just kind of made me think, wow, that's such a violent end to such a, you know, this very extravagant life, you know, and it kind of made me and suddenly the kind of language came out. This is going to sound kind of mystical, but I was kind of sort of channeling his language, or kind of allow it to, I don't know, to kind of inspire the language of the poem. Just this kind of almost abstraction of and images, and try not to make sense of it. That kind of reminded me of Hart Crane. So I don't feel like it was really kind of my voice. I was kind of assuming or was trying to, and it just kind of came very naturally. I didn't try to make sense of it until after in the revision process. It was probably a little bit more abstract at the beginning.
Well, he was,
a little different.
as you know, he was a visionary poet, and he had that hard edge Elizabethan language, and he included so much in his work, and he wrote his, the bridge, as you know, from that building where Roebling, the architect, lived in that same building. And he just, one of the great poets. We did a reading from him. I read 3 of his bios. The last one was by Paul Mariani.
Yeah, that's the one I was reading. Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you love him too. I remember I read one place where he had a note above his desk, and it said, "Make my dark poem light and light." I think it was a quote from Melville. But you have such a large range in poetry. How do you, what do you do? I may have asked you this question before, but when you sit down to write a poem, you have an image in your mind, you have phrases come into you, emotion, or words just come to you. How do you do that? And also, do you rewrite?
Yeah, I mean, those are interesting questions. I think it depends on the poem. And sometimes I'll get an idea or a first line, and it goes from there. And then other times, like the Hart Crane poem, I wasn't expecting it. I just wanted to imitate the language of Crane at first, and then the situation of writing about his end came as I was writing it. And sometimes it just, like the Francoise Hardy poem, I actually didn't want to write it. I was like, I don't want to write one about this pop star French publicist, but I thought it was going to be bad. It's just going to be an exercise. And then as I was writing, it's like, okay, this is not that bad. Some images are kind of working, and the imagination is kind of taking its place. But that one I actually didn't want to write because of the subject matter. Because I had already write a poem about David Bowie, one about Juan Gabriel, the Mexican singer. So it's like I don't want to write about like writers. It's okay to write about writers or artists, but it's like, oh, another pop star, maybe I shouldn't. And then I don't really know that much about Francoise Hardy, just a few songs here and there. But I thought, well, she's kind of interesting. I'll give it as an exercise, and then I think it turned out. It turned out fine.
Why do you think he jumped overboard?
I think because he, this is kind of, I think, mentioned in the biography, but he had addiction problems. And I think not just alcohol, and I think maybe sexual addiction too. And a lot of, I think he also felt like an outsider. And a lot of his life, and being gay at that time, and also, he was, I think, he was partly Latino too. So there was a kind of, I really liked that the Latino aspect of his work that's not mentioned a lot, but I feel it more as his sensibility. Even though he's writing, in a very kind of Elizabethan, very Anglo-Saxon kind of language, I think his sensibility is very, very Latino, and also his readings in the French Symbolist. Also, he's American, but to me, he's kind of in between. He's a kind of an outsider, I think, in a lot of ways. But it must have been very hard for him, who he was, in that society.
Well, and also the use of serpent and eagle, and also his attempt to reclaim America, going back in time and reclaiming it, which is obviously physically unable to do in time, but also the bridge to me always was a symbol not only of spiritual, but of physical. And, I just love Hart Crane. You've written about your mom, and who are the poets that you look up to at this particular time that inspire you?
Contemporary poets?
Whatever it is, contemporary or historical.
Yeah. I mean, I like, I read Gawronski, who was kind of my, one of my mentors. And also I really like her poetry in terms of contemporary poetry. There's, I like a lot of the American writing today, American poets and the modernists too. Obviously Hart Crane and T.S. Eliot and Marion Moore, and I really like that language. But and then the writers in Spanish, the poets that write in Spanish, there are many contemporary and modern and even before. But of the Spanish language ones, I really am drawn to Cesar Vallejo, Luis Cernuda, who I don't think is as well known in the English-speaking world, as well known as, say, Lorca or Vallejo or others. But he was a Spanish poet that was exiled in Mexico, lived most of his life in Mexico, a gay poet, Luis Cernuda. Very, very great poet. In terms of the Spanish language one, Vallejo and Cernuda, they're my favorite.
You being a professor, and how does that jive with your poetry? Do you write more when you're teaching or when you're not teaching? I know when you're a teacher, you have so much research to do and writing and preparation, and then the execution of your what you've been thinking about and writing about to your students. How do those two hook up, and when do you write mostly?
Yeah, I mean, that's a challenge, just because I think to write poetry, and I think somebody said this, you really need to just do nothing, kind of observe and live and waste time. That's the best scenario for poetry, but I don't get to do that enough. Right now, I just got out of class. I have a meeting right after this. So it's kind of, today, probably not a lot of, poetry writing will take place. But other days where I can just observe. I think you're right. I like just observing, nature and whatever, paying attention, and reading and those kinds of things, but not that, letting kind of experience dictate, I think, what you write. I mean, that's how I work, because I don't have a set schedule because of my own work and schedule. It goes, it goes up and down. Summers are obviously, I have summer breaks, so at that time, I do more writing in general.
Now, I noticed that you're a original founder of What Books Press, if I'm correct. And could you tell us a little bit about that press, because it's really a wonderful press. I've read a few books from it.
Yeah, they're great. It was a collective, the Glass Table Collective, and I think most of the members a lot of the members are still actively working with it. And Gawronski and Chuck Rosenthal, Kate Hake, who else? Karen Kevorkian, a lot of local writers, but it's a very independent press, it's, I think they're going to celebrate 15 years now, and they put out very good, great list of writers every year. and not, not bound by any economic or marketing factors. So just very independent. I like them a lot.
One thing I've noticed in your work is you are a personal poet, but you transcend the personal. And you always include either literature or landscape. And how do you do that? Because, ever since the confessional poets, I did this, I did that, etc. How do you, as a poet, transcend, the personal? Not that one has to. I always feel if you really capture the personal, there's no need for transcendence. So I like that too. But how do you do it?
Yeah, I think it's all autobiographical, to in essence, whether one is writing about to personal experience or autobiographical material, or something that one can imagine, from literature or history, or it's all coming from, I think, from one's experience, one's lived experience, or one's imagination. So that's always very personal to me. And I like the confessional poets, the American poets, Anne Sexton, Sylvia Plath, Robert Lowell. I like a lot. John Berryman. I have a poem, one of my books, about a character. All we know about her appears in one of the dream songs. She's brown. She has dark skin, so that kind of made me think about that. But it's not deliberately kind of confessional. I think it's just, to me, it's just whatever I can write about. And some of that, sometimes it is personal, but I don't like consciously mine it for that. I think it's just, if it's a good idea for a poem, and I grew up Catholic, so I don't need to confess. It's already part of my upbringing.
You got your confessions out in real life.
Early on.
Yeah. Well, one last question before we go. What are a couple of classes that you teach at Northridge?
The ones that I teach on a regular basis, because they're, they're GEs, or kind of options requirements, or one of the options for students to take, that they have to take. I really like teaching a class on Mexican literature and translation. So this is Mexican literature for anyone. They don't have to be Spanish speakers. It's in translation, so we read a lot of great literature, mostly modern and contemporary, and it's very, since it's great literature, I really enjoy reading it and talking about it. And then there's a class that I also teach regularly on Mexican philosophy, and that's mostly also modern and contemporary.
Well, your students are lucky to have you, and we're fortunate
Thank you.
to come on the program. I always love listening to your poetry and hearing what's on your mind. So thank you
for the invitation.
Pardon?
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you once again, Ramón Garcia. Our next poet, Kathleen Tyler. Kathleen Tyler is the author of What Shadows Eat and Other Stories, the 2020 Cypress and Pine selection from Yellow Flag Press, and 3 collections of poetry, Open the Window and Drowned, My Florida, and The Secret Box. A poem of hers was chosen by Poetry in Plain Sight to appear on a poster in October in venues around North Carolina. A 5th-generation Floridian, Tyler lived in Los Angeles for 35 years and still misses it. She now calls Wilmington, North Carolina, home. Kathleen's poetry is lyrical, tender, dark at times, transformative. Here's a splendid poet, Kathleen Tyler.
Thank you, Harry. It's such a delight being here. And Ramon, thank you for those wonderful poems. There are just so many lines and ideas that impressed me. The death is the understudy, and epic, the family, the three acts, the epic family life, and wow, a soft meadow, her face. So I feel it's really an honor to read with you. I need to grab my glasses here. I went over this morning. I looked at the YouTube reading that I gave last time just to make sure I didn't read the same poems again. And I thought, like listening to it, I thought, geez, I can't even follow half those poems. So I thought I would start with something more narrative. It's called Poem for a Tentative Morning. I don't know why exactly the mirror hangs there, perhaps to make the patio garden appear larger, but there it is, nailed to the garage wall, blooming its own mass of white roses, its four corners enclosing another country whose borders refuse ours. Beneath an umbrella, the image of the umbrella, my face floats towards the edges, dissolving behind splotches of red, papery bougainvillea. A bird, how I know this bird, desperate to fly into a new domain, as if risen from my blood and freed from my palm, flings itself skyward, then hurtles down into this lush country of illusion. The confrontation with its other self, which is purer, having no reflection, leaves the bird crumpled, breast pulsing in the dirt. When I can look again, it's standing, tail feathers bent to an impossible angle. I poke it with a stick, and it hops a few inches, mouth open, begging, then flies into a gardenia bush still budded tight against spring. Momentarily distracted by the promise that lures us towards a vision of ourselves, but kills first, I look away. When I look back, the bird is gone. All afternoon, I searched beneath the denseness of ferns and azalea bushes for its body. I'd like to say it flew out of the stunned silence into the kingdom of air, and maybe it did, but I didn't see it. This next poem is kind of fun for me, sort of an ode to films, or particular noir films. And I thought, well, this would be the great place to read it. It's called Watching Movies in Black and White. Goddesses flit across the screen. I pretend that's me, dressed in black velvet pumps, tough as nails, desperate for love, fleeing my secret past, the old nihilism. Someone whispers, round up the usual suspects, but the list is too long. Memory fades, witnesses die. An airplane engine winds into being, propellers whack the night air. You take my hand, moist palm suspect. My hair tumbles out of a silk scarf, lips full, vermilion. The hero about to kiss me. You push the pause button. And then I am trapped in the hangar in a maze of concrete rooms. That is you in baggy dockers running. We stumble into each other, race to opposite doors. You only seek the way out. My thin, penciled brows arch, but my heart lurches. Switch to another channel. There is a man behind the curtains. The tips of his shoes show. Laced Oxfords, size 10. Clue in capital letters. We roll on the floor, laughing. Go back to the beginning of the poem, I say. Write it so it has a happy ending. I am on a street corner, night, neon blinking in a misty rain. Taillights disappear. My trench coat cinched, billows. I grasp a cardboard suitcase, a crumpled slip of paper with a penciled address. In a glass booth, a phone rings. This poem is an ars poetica of sorts. It's actually an old poem, and it's clearly written by someone who watched way too much Hitchcock when she was a child, both the show and the movies. But swiftly, the world enters. Every morning this summer I was 9, I spied on my neighbor's window a vase with a plastic rose wedged into one corner. In the other, I swear it was, a butcher knife stabbed into a rope. Between them, a large glass jar. I stared until the murky contents came into focus, a broad ribbon, then a mass of wavy hair, and, oh, shudder of pleasure, the head of my second cousin, twice removed, who disappeared in 1962. I was obsessed with psychos loose everywhere. They imprisoned me in a cavern, sent demands with locks of hair, drops of blood. I escaped through a hole in the earth, climbed into a thicket of trees. In the distance, sirens rushed towards my house, which was burning to the ground forever, leaving me an orphan. My father woke me from my sobbing sleep. Be reasonable, he said. I was. The day my sister didn't come home from school. She stopped for a root beer float, I said. Then her body was found shoved in the weeds of a dry riverbed. That girl I was, trembling on the edge of the dark forest of her imagination, died too, and I'm glad of it. So that's all the movie poems. And like you mentioned, I live in LA for a long, long time, and I used to love to go hiking. And this poem is, the idea came when hiking in Kenneth Hahn Park. If you've ever been there, I'm sure many of you have, but it's beautiful, it's Japanese gardens and waterfall. And then you look down the hill and there are oil rigs everywhere. And I mean, it's funny where oil rigs can take the mind, but okay. It begins in darkness. An egg boat slewing like a tiny moon. I give up my furred accomplices, leave the cave of my early longing, wake to a changed world, eyes beating against the unaccustomed light. Slowly it becomes apparent how much unoccupied space, the inside emptied out, ruins of oil rigs shadow me as if they could pump the sweetness of return from their own depths. Trails like monstrous worm burrows through brown hills. The rumor of a whimper's cry, unrippling clouds so far from shore. Even if I could glimpse the coast, there would be no stars tattering the night's heavy metals. I forage for something just reasonable, a life I am sure happened, dreams mouthed in soft dirt, some mewling not yet smothered. Okay. This one takes us to Griffith Park. So I say I'm reading a hiking poem, and I know that can give the impression of, green trees and blue skies, but somehow they don't turn out that way. Anyway, this is called Borderland. Evening, the sun a mere ornament pinned to withering pink. In the distance, the port rocking, though I am no longer young. Even when I was young, I thought I'd disentangle circling hawks from the Hollywood sign. Its H toppled. Radio towers poke holes in the sky. The water tank's rusty tagging. Il ne se passe rien. as if the scrawler traveled thousands of miles with only an astrolabe to end here. The boredom of pools, splash of children rippling like light from stars long dead. Bougainvillea scrapes the ruins of red-tiled mansions. Though once I remembered the sough of pine tufts against sap-crusted bark, a line of fire ants flagging me down, a golden-eyed dog, husband in baggy corduroys, everywhere he steps a bruise. These next poems I have to go back to Florida, and they're about my mother and about myself. If you've ever had a illness like cancer that you've struggled with, and I think it's weird, but it's the one thing that brought me close to my mother. After I left, when the doctor told you the cancer had spread, there was no hope. I imagined myself in Sarasota, seated next to you, taking your hand. It's all right, Mother. There's a healer whose touch cures the faithful. But I had deserted you years ago. Your Rococo museum, circus tents, and fields of wild boar left you languishing in a silver airstream constructed only of sun glimmering off sawgrass. Through its slender oval window slit open, you watched a girl run into another landscape. I have tried to exit this poem for once to give something only to you. But Mother, after you died, I sat in the same chair, heard a doctor tell me, malignant tumor. I looked out his picture window, saw pigeons ruffling their grayish feathers on the ledge. My son and daughter waited in the lobby, bearing the future of the world eclipsed. And all I could think of was the green water of the Gulf unfurling and how you waited alone for a miracle to happen. And this one goes with that one. It's called Last Gift. On the film sheet, the lump looks like a galaxy, a white mass with reticulated ends spinning through negative space. I come to know the language it whirls after itself, in situ, not invasive, metastasized, and all its stages, as though it has learned to sit, to bounce a ball, strap on skates, things my mother taught me. Rocking on a swing in the play area of a drive-in movie, my head tilted, my sneakers dragging sand. Name the constellations, I insisted. Start with the Hydra. Last time I saw her well, she was deadheading hybrid tea roses, her clippers punctuating air, as if to say they demand too much. Finally, I am close to her, brought together on a field of wildly reproducing cells. I will regard with similar mystification the surgeon's strange violet hieroglyph marking my own breast. This is how we die. Circling the nipple of the swollen purple areola, a word so like aureole, the radiance crowning saints. Do not ask the names of things, she said. Love only their light, their form, the shape of the radiologist's mouth. This could be benign. This could be deadly. Yeah, that was from my first book. I have been kind of going back and forth. If do I have time for one more? Okay, I guess so. This is, I really want to read this. Again, it was written about another hurricane And I want to read this in honor of those who did and did not survive the disaster that was Hurricane Helene in Florida, right where I lived. And I mean, I'm here in North Carolina, but also here in North Carolina. And it's about a hurricane that happened 1928. And it's kind of like a first person mother speaking. Okay, Fort Myakka Cemetery. Crows skreel through the stunned boundaries of oaks into a scrub pine forest. They pull me willingly because I know what is most terrible is not seeing. Dead and missing pass this way. The sign reads, disturb at your own risk. A girl was near me once. She had braided hair, gray eyes. Tell this one, she said. No, this one. The hurricane's first bowling across Lake Okeechobee. The Iowa fixed its mouth, wet, disastrous. The how. It is 1928. A wood shack smashes off its foundation. Palm trees snap. A child floats by, clinging to the carcass of a bloated cloud. Everything reflected. My own daughter, borne away by a storm of whose making. When wind rose, I hurried into it, thinking, take the wash down. Bit by bit, it unspooled its rage. She swept past, clutching a ragged palm frond, calling me, but there was only time to make high ground. Even now, bones are uncovered, skulls broken and hollow as conch shells, a shin radiant in sudden light. Palms buried beneath the surface of the flood no longer reach toward stragglers, waving their frothy crowns as I cross a mass grave of those not quick enough to survive the squall that blasted out the windows of childhood. My daughter sleeps in Fort Myakka Cemetery now, in a coffin shaped like a boat, in her earthy cradle, rocking.
Thank you, Kathleen. You're such a compassionate, elegiac, lyrical, imaginative poet. You include the dark and the light, and you always have such beautiful language. And it's radiant, through the loss. There's a radiance in your poetry. How old was your mother? How old were you when your mother died?
I was old. I mean, I was like, I guess 42, maybe. I guess it's not, that's not old now. I think, oh, wow. But yeah, I was 42.
I love that poem about the things your mother taught you, and your love of movies, the fun of dealing with that, and also your empathy, for the people, who have lived through a destructive time, the hurricane, and even looking back, and then talk about your sister, and does landscape, whether you live in LA or Florida or now North Carolina, does landscape affect you very much as a poet?
Oh, yeah, it drives much of what I do. Absolutely. I mean, short stories, too. It's almost like it's another character. I mean, we've heard that before, but it really, it's how it works. It's very, very important to me. And there's just so much in it. It's so alive. There's just so many things.
All right. When you sit down to write a poem, are you aware of the landscape outside, and do you write about that, or do you just have your own story going on inside of you?
Well, sometimes it's something set off by the landscape, like the hiking poems. I'm walking, hiking, and then these poems are starting to form in my mind. So then I sit down and work on them. But I have a nice window, looks right out on a big tree. It's one of the advantages of living in North Carolina. And it's always there. It's like the landscape is always around me. too. And I try to be out in it as much as I possibly can.
Right outside my patio window, there are an orange grove. So I'm always watching it, holding. Right now they're green, but they're getting bigger.
Yeah.
Green, and then they start turning a little yellow and then orange. And you see the cycles in nature. So always, I love to just sit sometimes and look at nature. I spend so much time reading, writing, watching movies, and right now, but how do you discern the difference when you sit down to write between a poem and a short story? Do you know where you're going?
It depends on where the seam rips, Mostly lately, I've just been doing short stories. I've been writing a lot of fiction. I've really been enjoying it. I mean, I miss writing poetry, but I've had these obsessions lately, strange, like with sea turtles and moon jellies and aquariums, and they're in a story. I thought I'd throw in this episode. I said, I need to do something else between the characters. I'm going to throw in this episode where they're at an aquarium together. And it turns out to be the key of the story, but I'm also using the same images, like working on a poem. I wished I had had it done for today, but I didn't. And so, they feed each other. And I'm really glad, I really feel the poetry work paying off in writing the short stories.
Well, the short story form is not that easy too, right? It has to be taught, and just like poetry, it's not like a novel where you can have all those ups and downs and take your time. And
right.
And prose has to be well written, just as poetry does too. But, which did you begin writing first, poetry or prose?
I think poetry for sure. I remember, just writing everything when I was very, very young. I just always loved it. And I mean, of course, it's all pretty bad, I'm sure. I remember a short story I wrote when I was really young, and poems I wrote. So yeah, both of them. But I think poetry was always the first love.
And when you were young, or shall we say before you really began writing seriously, what are two or three of the poets that influenced you?
When I was young, I loved Edgar Allan Poe, and I loved William Blake, and I just read those two all the time. I just tiger. I could just go on and on with that poem, and yeah, that's when I was very young, as a kid. I mean, they're still great poets, but I don't read them much anymore.
Since Kathleen just finished reading, Kathleen, could you say a few things about Ramon's poetry, and then Ramon say a few words about Kathleen's poetry?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I loved it. I loved the images. I loved how you were taken to a place, but always not just to be in the place, but to be in a mood or a person or something. I love I can't remember which one it was, but where it had the titles of movies and novels in it. Which poem was that? I heard like Dolce Vita and what novel? I can't remember the novel now.
They shoot horses, don't they?
Yeah. And then there was another novel mentioned in there.
Day of the Locusts.
Yes, right. Evil and War. Yeah, I've read that. That's great. And I love the way, because like with me, living in different places is been always kind of a conflict. I'm in California. I always miss being in Florida. There's certain things, I know it has this reputation, but if you know the springs and the rivers and you spend time there, it's very nice. But you had the same thing about like living downtown, and you idealize maybe in the suburbs, and then, well, that's kind of a death too. That's not it either. So, and Psychorax, that was a good one. Yeah.
Ramon,
No, I
Ramon,
I noticed that connection also to landscape and to this kind of longing for the other place wherever
Right.
it happens to be. It's like this,
Right.
it's almost like we're trapped in this longing, and yet kind of when we miss it when it's not there. I really recognize the LA landscape, the bougainvillea, and the hiking. I love hiking also, and just the landscape of Los Angeles. I think it's underrated. It's a very, just in terms of nature, such a beautiful city. And I like the personal poems by your mother, and that are more intimate. So, but yeah, the intimate is always kind of related to landscape too. To a certain degree. I saw that we have in common. This interest in the surroundings and the landscape, and the what's intimate about where one is placed or displaced.
When I first, Kathleen studied with my late wife, Holly Prado. And I remember when I first started going with her in 1977, and she took me to 7 parks, and she always had nature in her.
She did, yeah.
She was always aware of nature. And I invited a poet out here for lunch one time, and she wrote me a thank you note, and she said, it must be nice living among trees and gardens. So it really is pleasant walking in nature. Well, you two have just been marvelous, and your poetry always lifts me up, and I love this. I love the sacredness of poetry, which I see in both of you, the value of it. And so I want to thank you once again, Ramón Garcia and Kathleen Tyler, for your magnificent poetry. And I'm going to make an announcement next Tuesday. We have 2 wonderful poets with us, Holiday Mason and Christine Ray Anderson. It's really been a wonderful hour. So that's our show right now. And so once again, thank you. And I hope to see you both again on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.